Environmental law is a bedtime story. We tell it to ourselves to help ourselves feel better about what we're doing to our children. And I've come to realize this teaching environmental law. I have students who come into my classroom and they're full of excitement and they're going to use the law to change the world. And I always have to tell them, it's not quite so simple. Yeah, environmental law is a tool and the government does things for us. And yet, there's a piece of it where it's the government just cleaning up our mess. And maybe the next stage is that we need to start cleaning up our own mess. I'm really honored to be here today. You're the visionaries and leaders and the thinkers of Palm Beach County. And you're the folks who have to have this dialogue. And I'm glad to be part of this dialogue. And it's one that really got underway back in the 1970s. And Rachel Carson, a biologist in Maryland, wrote a great book about how DDT was silencing our spring. And a river in Ohio, the Cuyahoga, was burning. And a Wisconsin senator, Gaylord Nelson, organized a campaign of Earth Day protests. And even Coca-Cola and Philip Morris got together, and they realized that we need to keep America beautiful, and created a public service announcement campaign with a Native American standing by the roadside crying at all the trash. And there was a recognition that we were experiencing what Professor Garrett Hardin called the tragedy of the commons. You see, the environment is a commons. It belongs to all of us. And the tragedy is that every day, all of us are exploiting the commons, individually, rationally, in our own self-interest, but a little piece at a time. You know, the ocean is our commons. And we get in a charter boat sometimes, maybe, and go out fishing and catch a few fish and bring them home, fry them up, and it's delicious. But if everybody went and caught a few fish, there'd be no fish left. Right? That's the tragedy of the commons. And environmental law was our effort in the 70s to tackle this problem. And Congress passed some amazing laws, the Clean Air Act, and the Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act, and dozens of other laws that are noble and that have gone a long way. They stand for often a simple proposition: thou shalt not. Thou shalt not discharge water into the watersheds that violates water quality standards. Thou shalt not emit air into the atmosphere that violates air quality standards. Thou shalt not jeopardize the continued existence of an endangered species. And under this framework of environmental law, we've made a lot of progress. Things are better. But I've come to realize that we're picking the low-hanging fruit. We've solved a lot of the easy problems, and now we're dealing with the hard ones. Under the Clean Water Act, the rivers aren't burning, and we're not discharging toxic sewage into our watersheds anymore. And yet we have too much nutrient pollution from our farm fields and our front lawns. And Palm Beach County has problems with it, and we're not meeting water quality standards. And under the Clean Air Act, we've got scrubbers on our smokestacks, and yet we still have ozone alert days, and we've got so much carbon going into the atmosphere that it's changing the planet. And under the Endangered Species Act, very few species have gone extinct, and yet we're adding more and more to the list every single year, and none ever seem to come off. So environmental law has certainly helped. Perhaps it's slowed the rate of decline, but by itself, it's not quite enough. Let me tell you another bedtime story. Dr. Seuss, the Lorax. The Lorax speaks for the trees have no tongue. And he shouts at the Onceler, just what have you done? Because the Onceler has a factory that's making thneeds, a very fine something that all people need. And with his super axe hacker, he chops down those truffle of trees 4 in one smacker. But at the end of the book, the trees are all gone, the Lorax goes, the factory goes, and only the grickle grass grows. I realized, as I was reading the Lorax to my kids, that it's really just representative of the values debate that's taking place in environmental law. You know, the Lorax is like the environmentalists. They value the environment for their own its own intrinsic sake. And the Onceler is like industry, who values the environment as a resource to be used by humanity. And what environmental law has done, it has plunked the government squarely in the middle of this contest, solved the battle between the Lorax and the Onceler. And in my career as a government lawyer litigating with the US Department of Justice, I was called a radical communist tree hugger. I was called a greedy Darth Vader. And I'm quoting the lawyers. You see, the Lorax and the Onceler have lawyers now. And the lawyers for the Lorax go into court and they say, government, you're not meeting the standards you set for yourself. You're not meeting water quality standards and air quality standards, and you're not saving the species. Save the truffula trees, save the brown barbaloots, save the swami swans and the humming fish. And they're right. We're probably not doing enough, and we probably can do better. But the Onceler's got a lawyer, too. And sometimes he goes into court and says, I have my rights, sir, and I'm telling you, I intend to go on doing just what I do. And if you take my property or my profit away, oh, Uncle Sam, I will make you pay. And the rhythms and the characters of Dr. Seuss echo in our courtrooms. And I've come to realize that the tragedy of the commons has a sequel. Because the government is our commons. It too belongs to all of us. And it is being rationally exploited by different groups in their own self-interest. And I've come to call it the tragedy of the pie chart. See, because as a government advisor now, I'm working on budgetary issues all the time. And I realize that all we have is this small amount of money for each of our individual agencies. So much of our budget is consumed by other things. And for each tiny little slice of pie, I have a whole lot of responsibilities. See, what's happened in environmental law is the Lorax and the Onceler both want a piece of pie. The environmentalists say, government, you need to spend more to save more species. You need to spend more to save more watersheds. You need more enforcement. You need more permitting. You need more programs. You need more projects. But the Onceler wants a piece of pie too. The Onceler says, well, we need some grants, and we need some tax credits, and we need some public-private partnerships. And the only thing the government can do is take the fixed pie and carve it into smaller slices. And at the same time, society is shrinking the size of the pie. So we're taking that pie and carving it up into more and more pieces. And the government has less and less resources to do more and more things. And the risk is that we do nothing for everything. Maybe we need to think about the environment a little differently and the role of government a little differently. Dare we talk about environmental triage? Should we think about environmental defense like we think about national defense? The Navy only has 10 aircraft carriers, but we have threats all around the globe. How do we deal with that? Well, we do it strategically. And we address the biggest threats. Can we do that with the environment? Do you want to save the Florida panther, the manatee, the Cape Sable seaside sparrow, the gopher tortoise, or the wood stork? Well, you want to save them all, of course. That's the premise of Noah's Ark, and we teach that principle to our kids. But Noah didn't have a budget. We've got a budget. You know, here in Florida, we've got water quality issues. Do I want to meet water quality standards in the Everglades and in Lake Okeechobee and in the Caloosahatchee Estuary and in the St. Lucie Estuary? Of course I do. And that's what the Clean Water Act requires. But I also know that we're dealing with sea level rise and saltwater intruding into our estuaries and changing the water quality anyway. And I'm worried about my beaches, and I'm worried about my real estate. And if I have to choose priorities in all of this, I might choose to protect our coastlines from sea level rise, and I might choose to protect our coral reefs because they're 1% of our habitat in the ocean and yet 25% of the biodiversity. I'm going to start thinking about returns on investment, like protecting my real estate and protecting $1 billion industry of snorkelers and divers. See, but those are really hard choices. And do we want to make those choices? Now, sometimes government has made those choices. When Teddy Roosevelt said, you know, we need more water for the arid West, he sent the Bureau of Reclamation out. We built dams all over this nation. And San Francisco has a reservoir for water supply, but the Hetch Hetchy Valley is gone. And when John F. Kennedy wanted to send man to the moon, we went into the swamps of Florida and we built a space center. And the Apollo mission landed and NASA got rid of a whole lot of mosquitoes, but the dusky seaside sparrow was gone. And the government engaged in trade-offs, in triage in a way. And there's a professor from Yale who long ago, Charles Lindblom, wrote an article called The Science of Muddling Through. And he pointed out that the government was constantly making a choice between X and Y without really thinking through the consequences in the bigger picture. So is there another way? Garrett Hardin, when he wrote his article about the tragedy of the commons, pointed out, there is no technical solution. The government is not a solution. Environmental law is not a solution. We're not going to solve this by waving the magic wand. The tragedy of the commons is the consequence of the sum of individual actions, and it's only going to be reversed by the same way, incrementally, one piece at a time. You know, you can make choices. You can get a flyer in the mail from an environmental organization. Look twice at it. Is it just another group funding another lawsuit against the government, shifting the burden to the government? Or is it a Lorax who's solving problems, who's coming up with creative ways to tackle tough issues, who's telling you to help us buy land for conservation or research this new technology, or help the bees recover, or help us make huge leaps in battery technology? You see, the public sector needs to be supported by the non-governmental sector. And that's you. You have to decide to help them. But it needs the private sector too. And fortunately, the private sector is at a turning point. Not every industry is saying, I have my rights while trampling on yours. Many of them have figured out environmental sustainability. They're producing greener products. They figured out that waste and pollution are inefficient and costly, that we can do better than just meet the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, that we can even build homes in communities that enhance habitat for Florida panthers. We can do better. But that green industry will only make the green product if you buy it. Now picture yourself at the supermarket and you're standing at the seafood counter. And you're looking at that certified sustainable swordfish, you're looking at the Canadian farm salmon, and you're looking at the Thailand shrimp. Which one do you buy? The data tells me that you buy the cheapest. And you make that same choice every time you walk into a big box store and you buy a not so durable good made in some foreign country that doesn't have a Clean Air Act or a Clean Water Act or an Endangered Species Act, and that's not even trying. You see, every day with our choices, we are participating in the tragedy of the commons. We're taking the commons from our kids and from the next generation with every choice we make. Maybe we can do better. Maybe we can accept personal responsibility and stop looking to environmental law to think that it's solving our problems. You know, if we want to, it's as simple as pulling out our cell phones and our computers. You can make a big purchase now. You can buy a house that's green. You can buy a car that's green. And there are groups that will tell you. You can look up the Green Building Council. You can look up the EPA fuel efficiency rating. You can look up Energy Star appliances, and you can buy green. But it's not just the big purchases, it's the little ones too. Take out that cell phone and scan a UPC code, and you'll be amazed what you find. You might learn about phosphate-free dishwasher detergent or recycled toilet paper. And yes, there are things you can do in your shopping cart and in your supply chain every day. But the tragedy of the commons and the solution requires you to make it in everything you do. Self-restraint, make a moral decision. You know, the book of Genesis says that we are given dominion, but dominion means stewardship. It means responsibility. It doesn't mean tyranny. And it's our job to make greener choices every day, one little piece at a time. One choice not to put that fertilizer on our lawn, one choice to recycle, one choice to buy a greener product. And if you do it every day, incrementally, over time, perhaps we actually tackle the tragedy of the commons. But government can't always regulate, and Congress doesn't have enough money to appropriate. And we get nowhere when we litigate. Environmental protection is just a work of fiction unless you participate. When I read the Lorax to my daughter, at the end she said, "Daddy, why did the Onceler chop down the truffle tree? He could have plucked the feathers and they'd grow back." My 6-year-old gets it. Do we? Thank you.
One moment, please. One moment.